"She doesn't belong here," Kent sneered, loud enough for Emily to hear. Right after she'd outscored every girl on the court, I stood frozen as parents chuckled and whispered, "Charity case," like it was gospel. But it got worse. At the banquet that night, they laughed about us, called my daughter trash, while sipping from gold-trimmed glasses I paid to polish. The head coach looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's not about talent, it's about pedigree." They erased her. On paper. On purpose. What they didn't know? I'd been keeping score for years. And now, so was someone else. A national scout just offered her a $1,000 contract. If that we clear her name in 60 days. They buried the wrong girl, and I kept the receipts. Will the truth come out in time? My name is David Mercer, and I'm 45 years old. I work maintenance at the high school where my daughter Emily plays basketball, spending my evenings courtside while she runs drills after hours. Every squeak of her shoes on the polished floor reminds me of how far we've come since losing her mother. Head coach Thompson and his assistant Brad Kent run the girls' program like their personal country club, backed by wealthy booster parents like the Whitakers who treat team spots like birthrights. But they don't know about my collection. 13 carefully labeled boxes of game footage, stat sheets, and practice logs that track Emily's progress since 6th grade. The cold air turns our breath to fog under the old floodlight as she sinks another perfect three-pointer. Those who have power rarely notice the quiet ones who keep score. But let me start from the beginning. I drove Emily to tryouts that Tuesday morning, both of us quiet. The gym smelled like floor wax and fresh paint. Maintenance had been busy getting ready for the new season. Emily laced up her shoes while I settled onto my usual bench, notepad ready. Old habits die hard, you know? The whistle shrieked, and 24 girls lined up for layup drills. Emily moved with that fluid grace she'd developed over thousands of practice hours. Left side, right side, perfect form, every time. I made my marks. 12 attempts, 11 makes. The morning light slanted through the high windows, catching dust motes that danced around the players like silent applause. You ever watch someone do something they were born for? That's what it was like seeing Emily shoot corner threes. The net barely moved as the ball dropped through. Just that soft little snap that meant pure accuracy. Even Coach Thompson's whistle got quieter, like he didn't want to break her rhythm. 14 of 15, from both corners. My pencil scratched out the numbers, while parents whispered in the bleachers. The suicides came last. That's when most kids start to fade, their legs turning to rubber, their breath coming in gasps. Not Emily. She kept pace with the front runners, then pulled ahead on the final sprint. Her ponytail swung like a metronome, steady as a clock. Sweat darkened her practice jersey, but her stride never faltered. Something settled in my chest watching her. That old calm that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. The numbers don't lie, and these numbers sang. Coach Thompson blew the final whistle at 10:45. "Good work, ladies," he called out. "Take 5 while we post the roster." The aluminum roster board squeaked as they rolled it out. Parents crowded forward like pigeons after breadcrumbs, but I held back. This was Emily's moment. Let her see it first. She walked up slowly, hands loose at her sides. I watched her eyes move down the list once, twice. Her mouth tightened at the corners. That's when I knew. I stepped closer, scanning the names myself. Anderson, Blake, Carter, Davidson. My finger traced each line, waiting to find Mercer, Emily, somewhere in that neat column. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everything too sharp, too bright. A chuckle broke the silence, that smug little sound that makes your shoulders tense. Assistant Coach Kent stood 2 rows back, arms crossed over his clipboard. He caught my eye and smiled, the kind of smile that says, "Go ahead, make a scene. Give me a reason." The hallway clock ticked once, loud as a judge's gavel in the sudden quiet. I reached the bottom of the list where Thompson's signature curved across the page in blue ink. Below it, empty space. Just clean white paper where Emily's name should have been. "Dad?" Emily's voice was steady, but I felt her fingers brush my arm. "It's okay," but it wasn't okay. The numbers didn't lie. They never had. In my pocket, the notepad held the morning's proof. Better shooting percentages than half the names on that list. Faster sprint times. Perfect form on every drill. I looked at Coach Thompson, but he was already turning away. Clipboard tucked under his arm like a shield. Kent's voice carried across the gym. "Looks like some people just don't have the right pedigree for our program." I felt my jaw tighten. Emily's hand squeezed my arm once, warning or comfort. I couldn't tell. The morning light that had seemed so promising now felt cold, exposing everything, but explaining nothing. Parents guided their daughters toward the locker room. their voices rising in celebration or consolation. But Emily and I stood there staring at that blank space below Thompson's signature, wondering how Merritt could vanish in the stroke of a pen. I caught Kent by the trophy case as parents filtered out. He was polishing the glass with his sleeve, admiring his reflection like it meant something. Want to explain that pedigree comment? I kept my voice low, steady. He turned, that smirk still playing at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Mercer, some things just run in families, you know? Like talent, like connections. He drew out that last word, tasting it. Our program has standards to maintain. Standards based on what? Because I've got numbers that say, numbers. He waved his hand like brushing away smoke. This isn't math class. This is about pedigree. There was that word again. Sharp as a key in a lock. Some people understand that, some don't. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a banquet to prepare for. Remember those fancy banquets in high school movies? All sparkle. And, promise? This wasn't that. This was the Riverside High cafeteria with plastic tablecloths and parents trying too hard. I stood near the punch bowl, watching them orbit each other with their sparkling water, and practiced laughs. Such a shame about the Mercer girl, Mrs. Anderson said, loud enough to carry. But really, what did they expect? My Caitlin's been training since she could walk, Mrs. Blake chimed in. You can't just show up and— It's sweet they let her try out, though. Mrs. Davidson's voice dripped false sympathy. Like a charity case. That phrase rippled through their circle like a secret handshake. Charity case. The words made my fingers tighten around my cup. I found Coach Thompson by the podium, adjusting his tie. He saw me coming but didn't move. Just waited with that neutral expression coaches perfect somewhere between whistle and clipboard. Let's talk numbers, I said, pulling out my notepad. Emily, 11 of 12 layups, 14 of 15 from the corners, top 3 in sprints. I've got it all here, plus video from every practice this year. He glanced at the pages, face unchanging. Mr. Mercer, the decision stands. Based on what metric? Because if we're measuring actual basketball, the program's criteria are comprehensive. His voice had that final period of the day tone. This isn't just about baskets. Then tell me what it is about. Because from where I stand, that's just it. He straightened his tie again. Where you stand isn't where these decisions are made. I'm sorry if that's difficult to accept. The drive home was quiet. Emily stared out the window, streetlights sliding across her face like thoughts she wouldn't share. When we got home, she went straight to her room. I followed a few minutes later, knocking soft on the door frame. She sat on her bed, still in her practice jersey, the one she'd earned running drills in summer heat and winter dark. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't make a sound, just pressed her face into that fabric like it could absorb more than sweat. Hey, kiddo. I sat beside her, feeling the bed dip. We're not done. They don't want me, Dad. Her voice was muffled, raw. Maybe they're— Don't. I touched her shoulder. Don't finish that thought. She looked up then, eyes red but dry. What's the point? They've made up their minds. Their minds aren't what matter. The facts do. I squeezed her shoulder once. And we've got those in spades. Back in my study, I fired up the laptop. Created new folders, tryouts, 2023, practice records, game stats. The cursor blinked steady as a metronome, counting beats of pure resolve. Every video, every score sheet, every drill record. Organized, dated, ready. My phone buzzed. New email. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see. That email could wait. I had work to do first. Opening a fresh document, I started typing, keeping my tone professional despite the anger simmering beneath each word. To the Riverside High School Board of Directors, I began. You know how sometimes the simplest words are the hardest to write? I must have deleted and retyped that opening 5 times before moving on. I laid out the facts like I was building a house. Foundation first, then framework, then details. Emily's tryout scores, documented. Her conditioning numbers, listed. Previous game statistics, attached. Each point backed by dated videos and signed score sheets. No emotions, no accusations, just pure, hard data that any reasonable person would have to acknowledge. The clock ticked past midnight as I triple-checked every attachment. Remember those nights in school when you'd proofread an essay until the words stopped making sense? This felt like that, but with my daughter's future hanging on every comma. Finally, I hit send. The confirmation popped up instantly. Your message has been received. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The first step was done. Now came the hard part. Waiting. 48 hours crawled by like molasses in January. No response. Not even a, "We'll look into it." I picked up the phone, punched in the school board's number that I'd memorized by now. "Riverside School District, how may I direct your call?" The clerk's voice had that practiced cheerfulness that sets my teeth on edge. "David Mercer here. I sent some letters regarding the basketball program 2 days ago." One moment, keys clicked in the background. "I'm not showing any correspondence from you, Mr. Mercer." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I have the confirmation email right here. Perhaps there was a system error. You're welcome to resubmit." Of course. Should have seen this coming. "I'll do that. Thank you for your time." This time, I printed everything. 3 copies, each in its own folder, with every page initialed and dated. The next morning, I walked into the district office, straight to the counter, where a tired-looking clerk raised her eyebrows at my stack of papers. "I need these time-stamped and logged, please." I kept my voice pleasant but firm. "All 3 copies." She stamped each set, handed me my receipt. "These will be distributed to the appropriate departments." "I'm sure they will." I smiled, tucking the receipt safely in my wallet. Never hurts to have proof. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications. The team's main sponsor, Valley Sports Equipment, had posted on their social media, "Due to recent negativity surrounding the Riverside High basketball program, we will be withdrawing our support for the upcoming season." The comments section exploded within minutes. "Way to go, Mercer. Hope you're happy now." Some people just can't handle their kids not making the cut. First he harasses the coaches. Now he's costing us sponsors? Just like that, I'd gone from concerned parent to public enemy. Funny how quick people are to believe what fits their narrative, isn't it? I printed those comments, added them to my growing file, then my phone buzzed again. Voicemail from a number I recognized. Athletic Department. "Mr. Mercer, this is Director Walsh. We need to meet tomorrow to discuss these ongoing disruptions to our athletic program. 2 p.m. sharp. Please confirm your attendance." The message ended there. No please or thank you. Just a summons, wrapped in that thin veneer of politeness people use when they're done playing nice. I took out my calendar, found tomorrow's date, drew a red circle around it, pressing hard enough that the ink bled through to the next page. Fitting, somehow. Staring at that red circle, I wondered what new rule they'd pull out of thin air, what trap they'd set in that office, thinking they could pressure me into backing down. Well, they were about to learn something about pressure themselves. The clock on my wall kept ticking, counting down to tomorrow's meeting. Each second felt like another piece being moved into place. But whose game were we really playing? Ever organize your whole life in one night? That's what it felt like. Sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with external hard drives spread around me like some tech ritual circle. Each one held pieces of Emily's basketball journey, fragments of proof I'd collected without knowing I'd need them. You know that feeling when you're searching for something specific, and suddenly every memory hits you at once? The laptop whirred as I clicked through folders, and each video thumbnail was like a time machine. Emily at 14, drilling crossovers until sunset. Emily at 15, perfecting that fadeaway jump shot she'd seen on TV. The sound of squeaking shoes and bouncing balls filled my speakers, echoing off the walls like ghosts of easier days. "Let's do this right," I muttered, creating a fresh spreadsheet. Column headers marched across the screen. Date, drill type, duration, success rate, witness names. The timestamps had to be crystal clear. No room for anyone to cry manipulation. I overlaid each video clip with its original recording date, adding drill names in plain text that even a first-year ref could understand. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen, keeping me company as midnight crept closer. My eyes burned, but I kept going. Each stat sheet got its own tab in the spreadsheet, color-coded by season. Green for freshman year, blue for sophomore, red for current. The numbers told their own story. Consistent improvement, rising percentages, decreasing drill times. Then came the hardest part, writing the cover memo. How do you explain years of a father's dedication without sounding desperate? I stared at the blank document, cursor blinking like a metronome. Methodology overview, I typed. Then backspaced. Too academic. Performance documentation, I tried again. Better. I kept it dry as dust. The following compilation represents systematic recording of athletic development from 2020-2023. All footage captured using standard equipment under normal practice conditions. Statistical tracking follows approved metrics. My watch beeped. Midnight already. I stretched, joints popping, and looked at my work. The evidence was solid, but something nagged at me. One voice, even backed by perfect documentation, might not be enough. Schools have lawyers, Procedures. Ways to bury single complaints under paperwork mountains. I grabbed a legal pad, wrote Evidence Pack V1 at the top. Under it, I listed every component. Practice videos, game footage, stat progressions, witness names, previous coach evaluations. Each item got its own tab in a thick black binder. The kind that means business. The athletic department meeting loomed just hours away. My eyes drifted to the wall clock. Its tick-tick-tick somehow louder in the late-night quiet. This evidence needed another set of eyes. Someone who knew the game, knew the politics, knew how to make truth stick. My laptop chimed. New email. The sender's name hit me like a forgotten photograph. Coach Dan Thompson. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since he'd retired from training regional teams. Back when I was younger, he'd taught me more about reading people than reading plays. The message was short. Heard about Emily. Dawn coffee at Jerry's Diner. Need to talk shop. I checked the timestamp. 12:17 a.m. What was Dan doing up this late? And why reach out now, just hours before my meeting? My finger hovered over the reply button. The last time I'd seen Dan, he'd told me something I never forgot. In basketball, like life, timing is everything. Well, his timing certainly got my attention. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., early enough to meet Dan and still make it to the athletic department by 2. The binder sat on my desk, ready for tomorrow. The videos were logged, the stats were clear, the memo was professional. But now Coach Dan wanted to talk shop. Jerry's Diner was one of those places where sunrise looked like a postcard. All orange light bleeding through cloudy windows and chrome surfaces. I'd beaten Dan there by 5 minutes, just long enough to grab us a corner booth with good lighting. When he walked in, it was like watching muscle memory in motion. Same measured stride, same quick scan of the room, same half smile when he spotted me. Time had added some silver to his temples, but his eyes were sharp as ever. Black coffee, he told the waitress before even sitting down, and keep it coming. That was Dan. No small talk until the caffeine hit. I slid my laptop across the table, already cued to Emily's highlight reel. Thanks for meeting me this early. Early? He chuckled, wrapping weathered hands around his coffee mug. Son, I've been up since 4 thinking about this. Show me what you've got. You ever watch someone study something they truly understand? Dan's focus was like a laser as he clicked through the clips. He'd rewind sections, frame by frame, studying Emily's footwork during crossovers, her weight distribution on jump shots. Look at that pivot, he muttered, replaying a sequence where she spun past 2 defenders. Perfect balance point. You don't teach that. Kids either get it, or they don't. He tapped the screen. She gets it. I felt my shoulders relax a fraction. That's what I've been saying, but nobody's listening. Dan leaned back, coffee forgotten. David, I've coached regional champions for 30 years, built programs from nothing. Know how many politics I've seen? He shook his head. Too many. But I've never seen talent get buried without a fight. We spent the next hour dividing tasks. Dan would draft an evaluation letter, heavy on technical analysis and light on emotion. I'd build the appendix, shot charts, efficiency metrics, the cold hard data that couldn't be argued away. Key is comparison, Dan said, pulling up roster photos of the girls who'd made the team. We match Emily's numbers against theirs, drill for drill. No opinions, just math. Something about his certainty was contagious. We cut anything that could be called subjective. Replaced excellent form with 85% completion rate. Changed exceptional speed to baseline time. 5.2 seconds. Dan added context I hadn't even considered. Training threshold data. Recovery times between drills. Consistency metrics across different game situations. Each addition felt like another brick in a wall of credibility. Remember that championship run in '98? Dan asked as he typed. Everyone said that team was too small, too slow. Numbers proved them wrong then too. By 8 o'clock, my thin binder had grown into something substantial. The evidence had structure now, backbone. Each section built on the last, creating a picture even a blind ref couldn't miss. Time to move, Dan said, checking his watch. Athletic department opens at 9. You deliver this, then step back and let the process work. The fluorescent lights of the administrative building felt harsh after the diner's warm glow. The secretary did a double take at the binder's size but logged it in properly. Within an hour, my phone buzzed. The athletic department was escalating our appeal to the committee. Friday afternoon, the email read. 2 p.m. sharp. Full review hearing. I stood in the parking lot, receipt in hand, staring at those words. 3 days to prepare. 3 days until the committee would sit in judgment. looking down from their high table like some sports court tribunal. Dan's voicemail was waiting when I checked my phone. Good work this morning. Now the real prep begins. Call me. We're not done yet. Ever notice how some rooms just feel like bad news before a word's even spoken? That conference room was one of them. All stark fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs arranged like a firing squad. The digital clock on the wall blinked red seconds, each one loud as a hammer fall in the silence. I'd polished that presentation until my eyes burned, but standing there, watching 5 committee members shuffle papers, my mouth went desert dry. You'd think after all the late nights rehearsing with Dan, I'd feel ready. But ready's a funny thing when your kid's future sits in strangers' hands. Begin whenever you're comfortable, Mr. Mercer, the committee chair said, though her tone suggested comfort wasn't part of the equation. The projector hummed to life, and Emily's first drill sequence filled the screen. I'd seen it 100 times, but my chest still swelled watching her weave through defenders like smoke through a fence. The ball seemed magnetized to her hands, every dribble precise, every cut calculated. Notice the footwork here. Dan stepped in, his voice steady as a metronome. Triple threat position maintained throughout. Perfect weight. Distribution on the crossover. He advanced to the next clip. Now watch the defensive slides. Textbook form. Consistent speed both directions. We walked them through drill after drill. Emily's shot chart popped up, red dots clustering in the sweet spots like target practice. Her conditioning numbers followed. Sprint times, vertical leap measurements, endurance metrics. Cold, hard data that couldn't be argued away. Compare these stats, Dan said, splitting the screen to show Emily's numbers against the roster picks. The objective measurements speak for themselves. The committee took notes, faces blank as printer paper. The chair nodded at key points, but you could have played poker with that expression. After 45 minutes, she cleared her throat. Thank you both for this thorough presentation. We'll review everything carefully and reach out soon. Her smile was professional, empty as a new file folder. We appreciate your patience during this process. Walking out, Dan squeezed my shoulder. You did good in there. Now we wait. Waiting. Funny how that word can feel like acid in your gut. The email arrived just as dusk was painting the kitchen windows purple. My phone buzzed once, casual as a dinner reminder. But those words, those damned words, they might as well have been carved in stone. After careful consideration, the committee has determined Emily Mercer does not meet qualification standards for regional competition consideration. I read it twice. Like maybe the letters would rearrange themselves into something kinder. That's when I heard the small catch of breath behind me. Emily stood in the doorway, and I knew from her face she'd already read the verdict in mine. Remember that training invoice I'd been avoiding? It sat on the counter like an accusation. $400 for last month's private sessions. Another one would be due next week. The numbers danced in my head as I watched Emily disappear upstairs, her footsteps heavy as defeat. Shame has a way of climbing up your neck like ivy, doesn't it? Each tendril a different flavor of failure. I found myself staring at my old truck through the kitchen window, mentally calculating its Blue Book value. Probably enough for 2 more months of training if I sold it. Later that night, I sat with Dan on my front porch, neither of us touching the coffee I'd poured. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band ready to snap. Moths danced around the porch light, their shadows jerking across the floorboards. We are not done, Dan finally said. But my stomach was already nodding around a different thought. What if we were? What if silence would hurt less than fighting? The porch light flickered, and I heard myself whisper words I'd never thought I'd say. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just making it worse. The bulb above us sputtered again, throwing shadows across Dan's face. What if? My voice caught. What if there's nothing left to turn this around? The next morning hit me like a freight train of memories. You know that feeling when your bones are tired but your mind won't quit? I'd spent half the night replaying old videos of Emily's games, wondering if I'd pushed too hard, fought too loud. Dan called at 7, voice clipped with urgency. Meet me at Rosie's, the quiet booth in back. If you've never been to Rosie's diner at that hour, picture worn leather seats and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The morning regulars know to leave that back corner alone. It's where coaches have planned seasons and real estate deals have changed hands for 40 years. I slid into the booth, noting how Dan's fingers drummed against his coffee mug. He had that look. The one I'd seen when he used to scout talent for college programs. Something you need to know, he said, leaning forward until our conversation became a bubble of whispers and steam. Remember that pickup game Emily played at the Y 2 weeks ago? I nodded. She'd come home grinning, Said it felt good to just play without pressure. There was someone watching. National Scout. The quiet kind that doesn't wear logos or hand out cards. My coffee stopped halfway to my mouth. What? They've been tracking her stats since junior high. That game was their final look. He reached into his weathered leather briefcase. This arrived yesterday. The paper he slid across the table looked ordinary enough. Standard letter size, crisp folds, but the numbers on it, those were anything but ordinary. $1 million, I read aloud, then had to say it again because my brain refused to process it. $1 million? Development contract, professional training pipeline, college guaranteed, future earnings percentage. Dan tapped the page. It's real, David. Very real. You ever have a moment where the world seems to tilt sideways? Where everything you thought you knew suddenly reshuffles like a deck of cards? That's what those numbers did to me. 7 figures of validation staring up from white paper. But then, I saw the conditions section. Requirements in clean black type that might as well have been barbed wire. No pending athletic disputes. No eligibility questions. No institutional conflicts. My hand wasn't quite steady as I pulled out my pocket calendar. Dan watched me flip pages until I found a date exactly 60 days out. The red marker felt heavy as I drew that circle. 3 words in all caps. Clean by here. 60 days, Dan said, like he was tasting the timeline. We can do it. But we'll need to be smart. He pulled out a legal pad, started sketching boxes and arrows. First, we document every performance metric. Times, scores, comparisons. Build a wall of data they can't ignore. I watched him map it out, the strategist in him taking over. Then we overlay the favoritism pattern. Roster, spots that went to booster kids with lower numbers. Training funds redirected to private programs. His pen moved faster. Not accusations. Just facts in daylight. The morning crowd at Rosie's had thinned out, leaving us in a bubble of coffee smells and possibility. My anger from months of fighting had crystallized into something colder, more focused. Time was the enemy now. Not the coaches, not the committee. Just 60 boxes on a calendar that needed conquering. It's a narrow window, Dan said, capping his pen. But narrow windows are still windows. I stared at that red circle I'd drawn, listening to the marker cap click back into place. The sound hit my ears like a starter's pistol. And suddenly all I could think was, how in God's name are we going to flip this whole broken story in just 60 days? The weight of it settled on my shoulders like a loaded bar, heavy with purpose. $1 million. A future. A chance to turn every sneering trash comment into ash. But first, we had to clear her name. And the clock was already ticking. Ever spend 18 straight hours staring at video clips until your eyes feel like they're full of sand? That's what Dan and I did in my basement office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and takeout containers. We had to get this right. No room for emotion or accident. Run that transition. I drill again, Dan said, squinting at the screen. The one from last March. I clicked back to the timestamp. Emily moved through the defensive rotation like water, anticipating blocks that most players wouldn't see coming. Next to her footage, we'd place clips of Sarah Matthews, the coach's star recruit, running the same drill 2 steps slower. Look at the footwork, Dan murmured, tapping the screen. Emily reads the court like a college player. Sarah's still catching up to high school speed. We'd been building these comparison sets since dawn. Emily versus roster players, drill by drill, stat by stat. The truth was in the details. Reaction times, shooting percentages, recovery positions. Numbers don't lie, and neither does video when you slow it down frame by frame. Remember to keep the tone clinical, Dan reminded me as I drafted the narrative overlay. We're not attacking anyone. We're just asking why merit isn't the deciding factor. You know what's funny? The hardest part wasn't finding evidence. We had mountains of that. The challenge was staying neutral, keeping the anger out of every sentence. I must have rewritten that script 20 times before it felt clean enough. How's this sound? I pushed my laptop over. Statistical analysis reveals consistent performance disparities between selected and non-selected players across standard evaluation metrics. Dan nodded slowly. Good. Dry as dust, but impossible to dismiss. Now link it to the sponsorship angle. Just the facts. I typed carefully. Financial records indicate 73% of roster positions correlate with booster program participation, despite lower aggregate performance scores. Perfect. Dan leaned back, stretching his neck. You can't argue with percentages. We packaged everything into a clean digital folder. Comparison videos, stat sheets, time-stamped practice logs, added statements from 3 former players who'd witnessed the pattern. Then came the part that made my hands shake a little. hitting send to 5 different sports reporters. How long you think before? My phone buzzed before I could finish the question. That was fast, Dan said, peering at the screen. The email was from Rita Chen at the Tribune. Compelling footage. Need to verify sources and original files. Can you provide complete metadata and witness contact information? I'd been ready for this. Sent back session dates, camera specifications, witness names. Added a link to the raw footage sitting on a public drive where anyone could check timestamps and file properties. Good, Dan said, reading over my shoulder. Now we wait. The Tribune's response came quick. Reviewing overnight. Expect follow-up questions tomorrow. I walked Dan out around midnight, then came back to my quiet kitchen. Emily was staying at her aunt's house. We'd agreed it was better if she didn't see this part up close. The fridge hummed in that empty way that makes you notice every little sound. My laptop was still open, cursor blinking in a fresh email. The To field held the National Scouts' address. Subject line blank. Body text reading only, evidence incoming. I stared at that cursor, thinking about everything writing on the next few weeks. One word in that subject line could start the avalanche. But was this the right moment? Should I hit send now and trust the dominoes to fall, or wait until the first story broke? The cursor kept blinking, patient as a card dealer waiting for a bet. 3 days after we released the footage, my phone started buzzing like an angry hornet's nest. You ever watch one of those nature shows where a single pebble starts an avalanche? That's what it felt like. Mr. Mercer, the first call came from the Tribune. We're reaching out to several parents about the booster program structure. Would you have any documentation about payment channels? I kept my voice steady. Everything I have is already in your inbox. The reporter cleared her throat. And these training fees? They were standard across the board? I can only speak to what I paid, I said, pulling up my carefully organized spreadsheet. Emily's private sessions were $85 per hour. I have receipts for every minute. You know what's interesting about turning points? Sometimes they sound like paper shuffling and keyboard. The second wave of articles hit like a precision strike. The Tribune's headline said it all. High school sports scandal. Sponsorship money trail raises questions. Below that was a timeline showing sponsorship withdrawals matching deposits into something called Elite Youth Athletics LLC. Guess who owned that company? The assistant coach's nephew. I was fixing my morning coffee when Coach Dan called. David, turn on the local news. The athletic department spokesperson was at a podium, looking like she'd swallowed something sour. In light of recent allegations, we're convening an emergency session to address certain irregularities in our program administration. My hand tightened around the mug. Those last 3 words, program administration, they had weight now. The kind of weight that makes people sweat. Administrative confusion. That's what the head coach called it in his press statement. Like somehow thousands of dollars just got lost in the shuffle and accidentally landed in his buddy's nephew's company. You know what I call that kind of confusion? Convenient. The assistant coach? He went ghost. Wouldn't answer calls from anyone. Not the reporters, not the board, not even his precious booster parents. Funny how fast people disappear when the spotlight gets too bright. I was cataloging the latest batch of reporter transcripts when my email pinged. The National Scouts message was short. Status check. Eligibility clarity needed soon. My eyes drifted to the calendar on my wall. 24 days. Each square stared back at me like a ticking clock. Emily's future. That $1 million contract. It all hung on clearing her name before that timer hit 0. Patience, Coach Dan said when I showed him the email. We've got them scrambling. Now we build the knockout punch. He helped me arrange every document, every transcript, every piece of evidence into a dossier that would make a federal prosecutor proud. That afternoon, I walked through the gym to drop off our submission for the emergency session. The place smelled like fresh varnish. They'd just refinished the floors for the upcoming season. The roster board that had started all this was still there, but now it was covered in blue painter's tape. Looked like somebody was trying to hide something. But what really caught my eye was that empty spot on the wall where the regional champions banner used to hang. They'd taken it down for cleaning, supposedly. Just like they'd lost my complaints and confused their accounting. I locked up my house that night and pulled out the Scouts' email one more time. The paper creased easily, like it knew it was carrying the weight of Emily's dreams. Tomorrow's emergency session would either cut our wait time in half or drag us into overtime. And we were already in the 4th quarter. Dad? Emily stood in the hallway, her practice ball tucked under one arm. You think they'll finally listen? I looked at my daughter. This kid who'd never quit, never missed a practice, never stopped believing even when the whole system tried to tell her she wasn't good enough. They don't have a choice anymore, sweetheart. The truth's got teeth now. The hallway clock ticked behind us, adding its voice to all those calendar squares counting down. 24 days to turn administrative confusion into crystal clarity. 24 days to prove that merit beats connections. 24 days to show them that my daughter wasn't trash. She was $1 million investment they were too blind to see. I smoothed the scout's email and set it next to our evidence binder. Tomorrow afternoon, that emergency session would tell us if the clock was our friend or our enemy. One way or another, though, I knew this much. We weren't the ones who needed to be worried about time running out. The athletic department's conference room looked different this time. Gone were the casual poses and dismissive glances. Now there were lawyers in pressed suits sitting ramrod straight, and neat stacks of binders that could have doubled as wall blocks. You ever notice how things get real formal when people start worrying about liability? I set our evidence binder on the table with a solid thunk. Everything in here is documented, dated, and verifiable, I said, sliding copies toward their side. I'm prepared to sign a sworn statement about the contents. The department's counsel, a sharp-eyed woman who hadn't cracked a smile all morning, clicked her pen. Mr. Mercer, you understand making false statements in this context could have serious consequences? That's exactly why I brought backup drives with all the original files, I said, patting the laptop bag by my feet. Every video, every stat sheet, every communication, raw and unedited. Coach Dan stepped up next, laying out 20 years of athlete development expertise like he was teaching a masterclass. He walked them through standard benchmarks for varsity selection, speed trials, shooting percentages, defensive positioning metrics. For each one, he pulled up a clip of Emily, not just meeting the mark, but clearing it by daylight. Here's your own conditioning threshold from last season, he said, pointing to a timestamp. And here's Emily beating it by 12 seconds. I've got 30 more examples just like that. The department chair, who'd been awfully quiet until now, finally spoke up. The integrity of competitive sports requires prompt attention to clear inequities. She glanced at their lawyer, who gave a slight nod. We'll take a brief recess to review. That brief recess stretched into 2 hours. I counted ceiling tiles while Coach Dan worked a crossword puzzle. Finally, the door opened. The chair read from a prepared statement. Upon thorough examination of presented evidence, the prior determination of unqualified status is hereby vacated. Emily Mercer's eligibility is restored, pending standard compliance verification. My shoulders dropped about 10 pounds. Coach Dan's crossword pencil snapped. We weren't even back to the car when my phone buzzed. The National Scout's message was typically brief. Positive development. Please provide final confirmation letter stating no outstanding eligibility disputes. We'll be at Airport Marriott until noon tomorrow. I spent the drive home drafting that letter in my head, keeping it simple and bulletproof. The words flowed easy now that truth had momentum. The gym was empty when we walked through, but it felt different. The hollow echo of our footsteps didn't sound like rejection anymore. Now it felt like anticipation, like the building itself was holding its breath. At home, I laid everything out on the dining room table. The term sheet with that beautiful 7-figure number, a fresh legal pad, and my best pen. The heavy one I'd gotten when I made foreman at the plant. The clock on the wall read 11:59 p.m. Emily sat across from me, still in her practice gear. She'd hit the court after dinner, like always. Some habits don't change just because the world does. Remember when you used to time my free throws with that clock? She asked. I did. Back when she was barely tall enough to reach the rim, I'd call out each minute while she practiced. 100 shots minimum, no matter how long it took. The discipline of small moments building toward something bigger. Now here we were, watching another minute tick down. But this time it wasn't counting missed shots or extra drills. This time it was counting down to everything we'd fought for. The second hand swept toward midnight, carrying tomorrow with it. Somewhere in a hotel room across town, $1 million contract was waiting for a father's pride to meet a daughter's promise. I set the pen down next to the term sheet and watched that last minute of today fade into the first minute of whatever came next. The air felt different, charged, like the stillness before a summer storm. The department's findings hit my inbox at 6:17 a.m. I was already up, watching the sun paint stripes across my kitchen table, when the notification dinged. You know that moment when you can feel your whole life about to pivot? That's what that little electronic chime sounded like. I opened the PDF with hands that weren't quite steady. The executive summary pulled no punches. Investigation confirms systematic misappropriation of sponsorship funds through unauthorized disbursement to private training entities. Below that was a detailed breakdown that read like a prosecutor's dream. The assistant coach had been running quite the operation. Every major sponsorship dollar that should have gone to team development had been quietly rerouted through a maze of paperwork to his nephew's elite training program. We're talking tens of thousands meant for equipment, travel, and scholarships, all funneled into family pockets. The head coach didn't get off clean either. The report laid out a damning pattern of negligent oversight and willful ignorance of irregularities. Remember those missing complaint letters? Turns out there was a whole drawer full of similar incidents that had been conveniently misfiled. My phone started buzzing with text messages. The assistant coach had been fired on the spot and reported to the State Athletic Association for ethics violations. All those lucrative contracts tied to his nephew's training scheme? Cancelled. The head coach's program was hemorrhaging sponsorships faster than a cut artery, and the reputational damage was already showing up in next season's recruitment numbers. You should have seen those booster parents scrambling. The same ones who'd sneered charity case were now desperately trying to explain why their kids had been enrolled in that nephew's training program. Funny how karma works sometimes. At 10 a.m., Emily's formal clearance letter arrived, clean as fresh snow with about 15 official signatures and stamps. I made 3 copies before I even let myself breathe. The National Scouts' response came minutes later. Status confirmed green. Proceed to signing at noon. Location: main gym. I spent the next hour making sure Emily's navy blazer was pressed just right. She'd bought it secondhand for debate club last year, but it looked like it was made for today. Remember when she used to play dress-up in my old work shirts? Now here she was, straightening a real blazer for a real contract. Life has a way of sneaking up on you like that. The gym was packed when we walked in at 11:55. Reporters lined the walls, parents filled the bleachers, and even a few college scouts had shown up, probably hoping to get an early line on whatever program would eventually land Emily. The National Scout stood at center court, contract folder in hand, professional to the bone in her charcoal suit. But I caught the slight smile when she saw Emily's game-ready posture. Game recognizes game, as they say. Everything's in order, Mr. Mercer, she said, opening the folder. $1 million in developmental funding, structured across 4 years with performance incentives. I read every line twice, my old foreman's habit of checking every detail kicking in. Emily stood straight-backed beside me, just like she did before every opening tip-off. The pen felt heavy when I picked it up. Good heavy, like a job well done. My signature looked steady on that line, right next to Emily's sharp, confident strokes. The scout handed us the official copy in a simple black frame. I held it up, and the gym's overhead lights caught the glass just right. You could see the championship banners reflected in it, like they were reaching down to welcome something new to their company. Those camera phones started clicking like crickets on a summer night. The sound filled up all the quiet spaces where doubt used to live. Reporters raised their hands, already fishing for quotes, but I knew exactly what needed to be said. I lifted that frame high, feeling the weight of everything we'd built and rebuilt. The glass caught more light, throwing it back like a signal mirror, and I spoke the only truth that mattered. They called her trash. Now she's priceless.